World War II affected almost every aspect of life in the Bayou State. As the war relocated many young Louisianians into the military for a direct contribution to the war effort, many of those left on the home front felt as though they needed to contribute to the effort as well, but could not because of age, gender, physical condition, or other reasons. They found, however, that they had many opportunities to help support the Allied cause. Their efforts included participation in war bond and stamp sales, collecting scrap for recycling into needed materials, and volunteering for civilian defense activities.
I took something to school for the war effort every day.
These opportunities brought the war home to many people and gave them a purpose and a place in the war effort.
One day a week, we bundled our newspapers with string, and you took the newspapers.
Utilization of material previously thought worthless began in earnest after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and subsequent United States entry into the war.
The next day, you saved every tin can and every metal jar lid and so forth, and these were taken to school one day a week.
Governor Sam Jones campaigned in February 1942, and Louisianians were soon rummaging through attics, barnyards, and backlots for waste paper, rags, metal, and articles made of natural rubber to recycle for use in the war effort.
Another day, and it shocks me, but toothpaste came in lead tubes, and you'd roll up the toothpaste tube and odd little pieces of metal, and they would be taken to school another day.
Cooks began saving waste fats in the summer of 1942 after the government asked for them because they could be used to produce glycerin for explosives.
Another day a week, you took all the fat, all the cooking oil, bacon drippings that weren't used in Southern cooking. All of that was taken in cans to school, and somehow none of that fat was reprocessed.
Louisiana threw itself wholeheartedly into the first nationwide scrap drive. New Orleans Mayor Robert Maestri met with school principals to enlist their help. The New Orleans Post of the Veterans of Foreign Wars and United Spanish War veterans staged a parade to begin the aluminum drive in the business sections of the city. Xavier University held a bazaar and charged 1 piece of aluminum per person for admission. Members of Rapides Parish 4-H clubs collected scrap, as did Boy Scouts in Metairie, Pineville, Baton Rouge, and other areas. Patriotic zeal remaining after the scrap drives could be directed into war stamp and bond sales.
And on Fridays, you took a quarter, and for a quarter you bought a stamp, and you had a book, a savings book, and when you had filled your little booklet, you had $18.75, which is what it took to purchase a $25 U.S. war bond. And in my school days, I think that I earned 7 or 8 $25 war bonds over the years with those little stamps.
The federal government sold war stamps and bonds in 7 issues to help meet the enormous economic burden of the war. The first series of war stamps and bonds appeared in 1941, and Louisiana entered into the spirit of stamp and bond sales, just as it did the scrap drives. Members of chambers of commerce in the state agreed to sell stamps in their stores to make them more available to the public. Delivery staff for most of the state's major newspapers also delivered stamps to their customers. Each war bond drive in Louisiana followed the same general pattern. Numerous newspaper advertisements extolling the patriotic and economic virtues of war stamps and bonds, business, civic, and fraternal organization members operating sales booths or otherwise assisting in bond sales, celebrities entertaining at sales rallies.
They used to have, they called them war bond shows at the old municipal auditorium. And I got to meet Gene Kelly when I was a kid. But you paid so much money to get a ticket, and in effect what you did is you bought a war bond.
As a result of continued hard work, Louisiana War Finance Committee Chairman Leon Tujak reported in August 1945 that Louisiana had exceeded its quota in each of the war loan drives. The war led to an increase in the number of marriages in Louisiana as men entered into matrimony either to avoid the draft, which usually proved futile, or to marry before leaving for an overseas assignment. Some debutantes in New Orleans abandoned traditional parties in 1941 in favor of civilian defense activities, in which they learned about air raid procedures, ambulance driving, and other skills useful in wartime. In New Orleans, patriotic observances often replaced the glittering social events of other seasons.
There was a great sense of patriotism. Every school class said the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of every school day, and you sang the Star Spangled Banner.
Providing entertainment for soldiers partially replaced normal means of recreation. Some young women joined the military maids and attended dances for soldiers 1 or 2 Saturday nights per month. In December 1941, the first United Service Organization, or USO, Center in the United States opened in DeRidder. It housed an auditorium, showers, locker rooms, library, game room, and kitchen for soldiers stationed at nearby Camp Polk.
Moviegoing was tremendously important during the war. It was one of the major ways you obtained news about the war. They had 5 10-minute shorts called newsreels. And so you'd go and see a feature film and there would be a newsreel. And the news was always about 3 or 4 weeks late. You went to these places and it was a great escape. First of all, they had air conditioning. And air conditioning was not common during the war. And so shoe stores and movie theaters were 2 places that you knew you could go and get cool.
World War II also intruded upon traditional holiday celebrations in Louisiana, generally giving each a patriotic element not normally associated with them. Traditional American holidays provided even more reason for patriotic themes. This tendency to make holidays into quasi-patriotic celebrations is especially obvious in wartime Christmases. America's last peacetime Christmas gave people the opportunity to reflect on their good fortune at living in a country still at peace. Many of them sought to symbolize this appreciation by making Christmas 1940 into a joy-filled, light-filled holiday. Christmas 1941 was dominated by the recent attack on Pearl Harbor and the reality that the United States was now a nation at war. Subsequent wartime Christmas celebrations also reflected the concern felt by many people about loved ones far away from home and exposed to danger in war zones. The holiday most publicly associated with Louisiana, Mardi Gras, was a war casualty. The last wartime Mardi Gras occurred in 1941 on one of the largest celebrations up to that time, with 35 balls and 12 large parades. Only 5 days after the Pearl Harbor bombing, however, governing committees of New Orleans carnival organizations announced that because it would be inconsistent with the present status of the nation, there would be no Mardi Gras parades or balls in 1942, thus canceling the celebration for the first time since 1919. The Harlequin crew held the only ball of the 1942 season, a dance in honor of 1,500 servicemen. The war dictated the theme of the ball, the occupation of Iceland. Later Mardi Gras days were used to promote bond sales, but as the war ended, officials of the Mardi Gras cruise decided in late August 1945 to resume their regular activities for the 1946 season.
The suspension of Mardi Gras was really major. And Mardi Gras was, much more so then than now, a very carefully paced social system. When the war ended and they brought Mardi Gras back, there were just about 5 old crews. But I can remember the throws. Today you see the streets littered with beads, but it was very rare to get a throw in 46. That was the first year they came back. And I still have a little clay dog that my father caught. And we saw every parade that first year, and he caught one thing.
After the war had been going on for a while, there were a number of German prisoners of war at Camp Claiborne, and they were put to work. And as a consequence of that, many of them were brought into town in LeCount to unload materials from both my grandfather's warehouses and another warehouse that belonged to an adjacent store that had grain and various things like that. And so it was not an uncommon sight at all for there to be a couple of truckloads of German POWs guarded by soldiers with machine guns right across the street in the middle of town.
There were some German prisoner of war camps in this area. In fact, a most notable one was at Hammond, and it was located right out near where the current airport is. And it housed actually substantive numbers of German prisoners who were rotated through there. They famously, allegedly would slip out every now and then and come into the theaters in Hammond and stuff and watch movies. And the joke was you could tell that they had been there because they smoked cigarettes differently, that they would smoke it down to the very nub of their finger, and they would claim that some German prisoners had been in here watching the movies, you know. But they were used to cut timber. And they were hauled about the area. They almost could be leased out. It was an arrangement through the federal government, of course, but you could bring them and help clear cut timber. They were used in cleaning out some of the waterways. In fact, I was in Amsterdam when I was studying in Europe years ago, and I ran into a man, and he saw my name tag on my pack, and he said, I was in Louisiana some time back. He said, you're from Louisiana? And I said, yeah. He said, I was in Louisiana some time back. And I said, oh yeah, you know, what'd you think of it and everything? He said, not too much. And I said, why was that? And he said, well, I was a POW. And I said, is that right? And he said, where were you? And he said, we were actually in a temporary camp near Greensburg. And he said that they were up there cutting timber. And he said, they'd wake us up before dawn. And he said, we cut timber 7 days a week till the sun set and everything. He said, I was happy to get out of Louisiana. But there were moved across the region. My mother even remembers stories at her daddy's store, which was near Greensburg and everything, trucks of them pulling up and filling up with gas and stuff. So they were around, and actually some of them have even come back after the war. We have an interview with one person who came back and temporarily set up a bakery in this area and everything. So some of them must have enjoyed their time here a little bit.